Hi, I'm Frank Duff, the Chief Innovation Officer at Tidal Cyber. I'm here today with Jason Keirstead from IBM Security to talk about their recent addition to the Tidal Registry by bringing their data into our platform that's available at app.tidalcyber.com for you to look at. But more importantly, to talk about attack, talk about through the years his usage of attack, IBM support of attack, and all the things we can to hopefully inform users of key lessons learned from all that experience on the goods and the bads, what it is and the like. And so with that, Jason, nice to have you. Why don't you give a little bit of introduction for yourself about who you are and who you work for?
Thanks, Frank. My name's Jason Keirstead. I'm the CTO of Threat Management here at IBM Security. And my role is basically I work with our product development teams, planning the strategy, steering technical direction to make sure that everything's built in order to solve for our customer needs. And IBM Security, for folks who may have never heard of IBM, I don't think there's that many. But in the cybersecurity space, we, sometimes I feel like we are a little bit stealthy. We're actually one of the largest cybersecurity organizations in the world, and we have one of the most broad software and technology portfolios in the world, as well as our globally recognized research arm, IBM Security X-Force. We also handle over 150 billion security events per day from our customers, and we have, pretty much everything you can imagine in terms of cybersecurity. Especially in my area of focus is on the threat management side. So I cover from detection all the way through to response in our software portfolio.
Yeah, and IBM is super complex, and I think that every year getting more complex. I know that there's a few different product lines within that, I think that Reacta is now part of the IBM family, and then there's QRadar. How do those kind of blend together for those that understand, and other products, right? Like from the security vendor perspective, like what's the different products that you support?
Yeah, we have a lot of products. So in the threat management side, we have our flagship platform is IBM Security QRadar. As you mentioned, it's our SIM. That's actually my background. I came in with the organization called Q1 Labs that created QRadar back in the day. But then around, around the halo effect of QRadar, we have a lot of other products. So we have QRadar User Behavior Analytics, which is our UBA module. We have QRadar Network Traffic Analytics, which is our NDR product. And you mentioned Reacta. We recently acquired Reacta, which is our new EDR product, which integrates into that portfolio. We also recently acquired Randori from an attack surface management perspective, and that's now part of the threat management portfolio as well. And that's on the threat side. We also have a whole slew of other products on the data security and identity security side, IBM Security Verify and IBM Security Guardian. Not as relevant for this conversation so much because they don't really tie into the incident response lifecycle.
So much more than just mainframes anymore. So yeah, so that's very helpful. So from your personal experience, like I know that you've been around the attack community for years, and so just interested in how did you personally get started with MITRE ATT&CK?
Oh man, it's put me on the spot. So I originally got started in this community probably, I don't know how many years ago it would go back that I got involved in the OASIS Cyber Threat Intelligence technical committee. That was out of an effort at the time to try to figure out how to add STIX support to our products. And in order to do that, I first had to figure out what the heck STIX was. And as soon as I started doing that and following the community, is at about almost exact same time as when Richard Struess and the community there wanted to move it to OASIS. So it was all happening at exactly the same time, and that's when I started getting involved in that technical committee. And via that committee and all the work around sticks is essentially what daisy chained into involvement in attack, because it's just a lot of the I'll say circles of similar influence in those communities basically is what led me over there. As I was involved in it, like basically on the consumer side from the beginning, trying to figure out how to use it inside our products and how it could help our customers, because our customers, a big part of the way that innovation works at IBM is our clients will ask us questions, and then that will then drive the next thing that we do. So our clients were asking us about, what is this attack thing? We need to advise them on that. So we need to get very well informed very quickly. So
that's a really interesting story, and there's nice parallels to be had for those that know a little bit about Tidal's history, and specifically Rich Struce's, as he got name dropped there, our CTO who has a long history with sticks and taxi. So definitely appreciate the winding road and how that couples up to attack. But you mentioned that you started bringing it into the product and using it as a communication mechanism with customers and the like. But interesting, how does the team use attack today? How do the products use it? How do you use it internally? Whatever they might want to go down.
yeah, I mean, so as we mentioned at the beginning, IBM Security is a very broad organization. So I'm on the product side, and then we also have this vast services arm that does both. We have managed security services, which is actually running the SOC for our clients. And then we also have incident response services that will go out and do real-time incident response for threats at our clients. And we use attack in all of these different functions in different capacities, right? So in the managed security services, we have a large database of analytics that we deploy to our clients, our detections, our rules. And those aren't just for our own products, because our managed security services, they can do MSS services on top of QRadar, but they also do it for Sentinel. They also do it for Splunk and all of my competitors. So they have to have analytics for all these different platforms, and those are all mapped to MITRE ATT&CK, so that they can more effectively manage, and curate and figure out what detections to deploy, what clients and things like that. And then, on the X-Force side, the threat intelligence that we create and provide to our customers, both on X-Force Exchange and via our feeds, we map all that stuff to attack as well, because that's what our clients ask us to do. And the reason is because then on the product side, which is where we live, we want to be able to consume that threat intelligence in a way that's mapped to attack, so that we can then map it to the right detections to deploy. So on the product side, in QRadar, for example, we've had native support of MITRE ATT&CK for years now in something we call, there's two pieces of the product. There's a thing called the use case manager, which is, I would say it's kind of like a mini version of Tidal, but only for our product, right? So it doesn't have all the capabilities that Tidal's providing, but it gives you the matrix and lets you see what detections are available in the product to deploy. That's something we call the use case manager. And then we have a module we call Threat Investigator, which if you have an incident, it'll go out and reach out to a bunch of threat intelligence feeds, and it basically automates the level 1 of your SOC to go. It does data mining, and when it automates this level 1, it's trying to figure out what the threat is that is tied to this incident, and that's all being driven via MITRE ATT&CK. It's building an attack graph, an attack flow, if you will, and showing you the different stages of the threat actor and how they're proceeding through your environment. So those are a couple ways we use attack. We're also using it obviously in Reacta. The alerts that are coming out of EDR are mapped to attack. And there's other things that we've got down the pipe as far as how we want to have alerts inside the SIEM platform, more seamlessly mapped to the attack, so that it's not just it's not just available in the interface, not just available in things like the use case manager and threat investigator, but in the actual alerts itself, so that you have those technique IDs flowing through the rule content. So there's other things that we still want to do in the future as well.
So what I loved about your answers is that you actually touched on a couple very different use cases for adopting attack, but also showed how those use cases pull together, right? So you touched on attack as a communication mechanism, and being able to use it in the threat intel reports and communicating what these detections are and the depth of detections that you have in that platform. But then you also talked about, well, we wanted it to be able to communicate from threat intel over to detection and help build that story and that narrative and make sure that you're really being threat informed. So I love that you both touched on some of the more communication-y perspectives, but also the technical perspectives that attack brings to bear. Now, I know that not all is always roses with attack, and so like, are there lessons learned that you have from what attack is particularly good at or not good at, in terms of that communication? Where does that work, or where does that maybe fall apart? I think you touched on the work a little bit, but anything more to say there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I think some of this isn't necessarily going to be new news because it is a common thing, advice that most tech experts give out. But this idea that attack can just be used as a heat map, I find it's fraught with landmines, and we often see clients, and I would say that as security product vendors, we don't necessarily do the best job to discourage this as well, because every single product has this heat map,
Yeah.
right? We tell people that it's not a heat map, and then the first thing we do is show them a heat map. So I think, as vendors, we got to figure out how to, more effectively nuance how to communicate that, because, it's not just a series of check boxes. You don't check off this technique or the sub technique and then you're good to go. Every one of these things is like an infinite shade of gray, right? and because you have every single technique is an infinite shade of gray, and then there's I don't know how many hundred techniques right now.
Yeah.
The amount of variability in your coverage is immense. So you can very easily fall into this trap where everything looks green, or it looks like you've got a specific tactic all green and you're good to go, and you've just got to be cautious about that. I'd say so that's one thing, and I think most SMEs in the space understand that nowadays. The other part that is somewhat challenging with attack, from our perspective, is that attack is just a piece of the puzzle when it comes to detection. And sometimes I find that attack has become so popular that some teams are so centered around it and rotated around it that they kind of like forget about everything else. But the reality is that user behavior detection is still essential. Network behavior detection, essential, right? All of these things that we've been doing for years around anomalies and outliers, they're still critical, because everything does not map to a nice clean TTP. And you have to be watching for unusual activity in general, as opposed to, we're only going to write a whole slew of Sigma analytics to detect these very specific things. And then, these other, any new O-Day just slips right past our defenses because we're not looking for anything unusual. Right. So that's another caution I'd have. And I do know that, so we're also members of the Center for Threat Informed Defense, where we're, there's projects around discussion around things like, hey, should we work on things like user behavior analytics and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to, some evolution in that space in the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think they're very complementary, right? I think from my experience writing analytics, it was often the ones that you can pair with the behavioral, the UABA stuff, the user behaviors, that's a good way of whittling down the noise too.
Right.
And so maybe neither one of them is a smoking gun, but together they build a very good picture. So I definitely appreciate that. And the understanding of the depth of coverage, the shades of gray, as you put it, I think is a really important aspect, and is one that fortunately gets a lot of talk, but unfortunately still gets missed by too many. I'm curious of on specifically that note, what kind of guidance do you have, right? As a SIM vendor, as somebody who's developing a lot of analytics, right? You've mentioned services, writing, even analytics and all. Like, how do you determine how gray is the right gray, or how to prioritize which lesser gray to go after? Like, right? I mean, I imagine it's not just like you have, oh, let's build out a detection for every technique. Uh,
Yeah.
but instead it's let's build out some depth. How do you kind of think about how to prioritize that?
That's a really interesting question, because I do have, so this is another thing I maybe should have mentioned as far as, issues with attack. But, one of the things as a SIM vendor that we have a lot of experience with is you're only as good as what your observability actually is.
Right.
You can write all the analytics in the world, but if you are not actually collecting the data that those analytics really require to operate successfully, they're not going to do you any good at all. So, one of the things that, when our clients go out and roll out a SIM, right? We have like a lot of best practices and procedures. Obviously, we've been doing this for like 20 plus years. you know, we do it based on use cases. And one of the first things you do with a use case is you say, what are the data sources required for that use case? Do you have those data sources? You have to then onboard them into the platform and ensure they're working correctly. That alone, that's a big job, right? So, and I know MITRE has some work in this area, a lot of, great new work around mapping to data sources. And that to me is a very critical piece of the attack puzzle, right? In terms of how do you prioritize your matrix, you've got to start with what data do you have available and what does it map to? Because otherwise you're just kind of twisting in the wind, right? So that would be one big piece of advice to me is what's available in your system, use the attack matrix not just as a way to prioritize your detections, but to prioritize your data, right? How do you prioritize what to actually get into your SIM? Because there's a cost to every piece of data you collect. There's a cost, and that's regardless of how your vendor charges you, right? So the industry's kind of moved to an all-you-can-eat model in the SIM space, but there's still an infrastructure cost to you probably in terms of how much data you can realistically collect, right? So because there's a cost to all the data, you can't just collect all the data all the time. So how do you prioritize which things you're going to bring in? Using the attack matrix to help you with that is another great use case for it.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to think about, because right, for any given technique, there's going to be n number of data sources that they've got referenced of saying this is how you could potentially detect it. And one of the hot points from last year that a lot of people were speaking to was this concept of procedural variation as a limitation around attack. Right, attack shows the techniques, but they don't necessarily show, at least in a structured way, this is all the different procedures and implementations of that technique that could be executed. And I think if you do kind of take your advice on looking at the data that you have available to you, and you try to look about what types of capabilities are leveraging that today, you can then kind of start deducing, okay, well, maybe we need to focus on some other types of data sources to provide that heterogeneity, whatever that word is, heterogeneousness to the
Heterogeneity.
yes. So that you can actually have more robust defenses to tackle that procedural variation problem. So I really like the focus on data sources and being able to roll your own. So I definitely appreciate that. So one of the other points that I wanted to bring up is the fact that IBM does a lot with open security, right? And being able to contribute. You mentioned CTID as being members of that Center for Threat Informed Defense, the research efforts that are over there. We've mentioned historically your involvement with attack, but now you're taking part in Tidal Cyber, right? And we've got this, what I've already referenced is the community edition, where we've got publicly accessible repository with your data in it. Interested in what resonated with this effort. Why does IBM take such a focused approach on being open with security?
Yeah. So I myself have been a big champion for our open security approach for a while. And one of the great things about working at IBM is, as a company and a corporation, that IBM's been a strong supporter of open source, open standards for decades and decades. And that's always actually been, one of the, when I found out we were getting acquired by IBM, it was one of the positives. I was like, oh, well, that's actually good. I've always had great respect for the company, right? And obviously with acquisition of Red Hat and the bet that was placed there, the emphasis has been even stronger. So on the IBM security side, we've been invested in this in so many different angles. You mentioned some of them. There's a whole bunch more in open security. I won't get into all those there. But in terms of the, why Tidal, why this project was interesting, to me, what's interesting about it is the fact that it's trying to, level up defense in the industry, right? This community platform, the ability for individual end users to be able to go into a platform and easily see, hey, what products in the market today could actually help me make that's a huge amount of value that I see. Because I'm sure that we've all seen the cybersecurity landscape picture, right? With the cybersecurity industry and the hundreds and hundreds of logos that are so small that you can't even fit them all in a poster-sized image anymore. And we've all been to the RSA show floor and seen what a madhouse that is. There's so much going on in this industry, and it's changing all the time, that it's really hard for an end user to make sense of all the noise and know, who can actually protect me how, right? And ideas like Tidal and platforms like this, they can greatly help cut down that noise, I think, and help people make, intelligent, informed decisions on what are the best things for me to look at.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought the word how, right? Because that is important to Tidal. Is we want it to not just be treat it like a checkbox, like you mentioned earlier, right? We don't want that, right? We know that that's a failing of attack, or how people use attack, I should say. But what instead we want to do is give a little bit of context to how. And so interested in as we look at IBM data, specifically in the registry, how do you guys approach attack mapping? What should people be thinking about as they think about when they bring up the QRadar product in the registry and they're overlaying that with whatever threat matters to them? What should they be thinking about what they see as that coverage? What does that mean to them?
Right. So the approach that we've decided to take, and by the way, if you are an IBM client watching this and you have feedback for this, please reach out to me or reach out to us. I'd be interested in your take on what I'm about to say. So the way that we've decided to approach this is, so as a SIEM, QRadar is extremely flexible in what analytics you can deploy on it. You can deploy pretty much anything you want. But IBM Security, we have a large library of analytics that we provide to our customers for free. And a bunch of these ship with the product, and many, many others are available for free out on our App Exchange. We call it the IBM Security App Exchange. And what we have done is we've gone through all of the analytics in that database and they were already actually mapped to attack. So if you go to the App Exchange today, you can browse it by attack right now. So it actually wasn't a huge effort for us to get this into the Tidal platform because we already had that mapping. So what we do is we go through the analytics, map them to a technique, or we are constantly going through and updating them to be sub techniques where appropriate. And there's one interesting nuance that I'll highlight, and I know this came up when we loaded into Tidal, is is the product, is the data source mapping, which we discussed earlier, right? So in the way that QRadar works, we go to extreme effort to try to understand every single thing about the log that comes in and normalize it and categorize it appropriately. So when we write our analytics, we don't write them against discrete data sources. We write them against those categories most of the time. So an example would be, instead of a Sysmon Windows authentication event, our analytics will very often just look for an authentication. And that authentication might be in Windows. It could be in a Cisco device, could be in a Mac OS device, doesn't matter. And the analytic will be looking for an authentication followed by X followed by Y. And yes, maybe the analytic doesn't make sense outside of the Windows context, but other analytics, it could make sense because you're looking for a chain of behavior and it doesn't matter what type of thing you're authenticating to. You can map that example to other things like process execution and a whole slew of other types of things in the system. We write those analytics at that category level. So because of that, there's a little bit less granularity when you look at our analytics in the Tidal platform. They don't always map. We don't have the data source available because it's not actually linked to a specific data source. It's at a higher level. So I think, this is an interesting thing that's kind of fallen out of this effort. And, maybe it's, feedback. We'll try to work with the attack community on how you can represent that better. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so that's great feedback and really interesting capabilities. And I think that when we've looked at vendors with attack mapping historically, it oftentimes is a tripping point to understand what platforms things are applicable to. So I love the approach of trying to generalize the data sources, I guess, is a way of looking at it, to be a little bit more platform agnostic or even sensor agnostic, and instead just focus on the type of event that's coming in. So that's really, really helpful. I'm interested in kind of one extra little bonus question before we wrap things up here. But as somebody who is taking part in so many initiatives and kind of trying to drive cybersecurity to a better place with your work that you're doing, interested if you have any things that you're particularly excited about in terms of the where security is headed, the open security initiatives are headed, or anything like that you think, what, this is kind of something to be on the lookout for, because I think that's going to have an impact.
Yeah, great question. I think so. There's two things that come to mind, and the first is this OCSF project that we co-launched last year with Splunk, AWS, CrowdStrike, and about 10 other companies. That one is, hopefully going to be a pretty big impact because, one of my big bugaboos in the cybersecurity space, and, if you look at my Medium blog or anything, you can see I've written about this lots, is on data modeling. Yep. And the fact that, as a community, we've been unable to coalesce around any kind of a way to model the data. Every single vendor has their own data model. There's been efforts to create open ones, quote unquote, open and open source ones. I would argue that the Styx SCO model is a data model. There's an effort called OSSIM. MITRE has one called CAR. And, the list goes on. And Elastic has ECS. The list goes on and on. Yep. The point of the OCSS effort is, really to finally get a lot of the large players into the room and say, we are going to agree on something. And, we're going to start building analytics and detections around this model. So, I'm optimistic. Let's put it that way. I'm optimistic, fingers crossed. I hope that, this one ends up actually succeeding and getting that critical mass. And, when you have, between IBM, Splunk, CrowdStrike, Sumo Logic, you've got AWS, you've got a pretty big slice of the pie there. So I'm pretty optimistic about that one. The other thing that I would say is going to be a big impact this year in 2023. It doesn't so much have direct ties to attack, but it's around supply chain security and open source security. I would say 2022 was the wake up call around open source security and supply chain, and 2023 is going to be the big action. There's you look at the legislation that's coming down from there's discussions going on in the EU. There's obviously a bunch of moves that are happening with the White House. There's been such a huge effort and focus on this that it's going to be impossible to escape that impact. So supply chain security, SBOMs, VEX vulnerability exchange, that's all going to be a pretty big deal this year.
No, that's a really interesting perspective. And I think that what you're seeing in even like CTI right now is definitely focused a little bit more on the supply chain stuff too. And I think that it is a much broader awareness going on. And hopefully we can do good defense around it, because it is a big problem. And I think the other point on OCSF, right? I think that it's one of those things where you look at it and it's like, is that just another one of those data models, as you kind of alluded to? But I gotta say, when you look at the names of all the people supporting it, it is there is a glimmer of hope that it's actually going to be one of those things that can actually take hold. And as somebody who's written analytics and tried to help develop those data models, as you mentioned, CAR, yeah, I would love one to be uniform. I remember backing into having to develop yet another one right back in the day for CAR, and working on that. But yeah, no, it's hopefully all these help kind of push things forward, and really help kind of advance security. So that sounds great. So with that's it. I'll give you a chance. Jason, is there anything that you wanted to add or close out with?
No, thanks for having me. And yeah, looking forward to being on the platform and, getting that feedback from our customers on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you so much for being part of the platform, advocating for it within IBM and coming on to talk attack today. And I'll echo everything you said, right? If you've got feedback on IBM's data or anybody else's data or the platform itself, from Tidal, feel free to reach out to us. We always are looking to improve, and we'll pass that on to the community that's helping us build it, frankly. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for attending. And hopefully we can you can join us again next time we have another vendor come on and learn a little bit more about attack. So thank you all very much, and thank you, Jason.